Good morning, everyone. So this is a session on smartwatch development for Android. How many folks have an Android phone? Pretty much everybody, yeah. Otherwise, you'd be in the other one, which is smartwatch for iOS, right? So how many folks have a smartwatch of some kind? Okay, which kind of watches do you guys have? Pebble? Okay, anyone have an Android Wear device? A couple. Which one do you have, sir?
Sony Smartwatch.
The Sony Smartwatch 3?
Yeah.
Okay, it's not a bad watch. I'm wearing a Moto 360. I think they're coming out with Moto 362 soon. But there are a bunch of new watches coming out, which is great. In this session, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the design, kind of the UX around smartwatches, and we'll get into a little bit of code in terms of how you put together a smartwatch application. But first, I want to start off with just some basic capabilities, because one of the things, as opposed to doing straight Android development, when you do smartwatch development, there are a few little quirks and a few limitations that you have to be aware of. Obviously, the smartwatches have a touchscreen. There is a microphone, but there generally is not a speaker on one of these smartwatches. So when I have this on and I see somebody who's not familiar with Android Wear devices, a common question is, oh, can you talk into it and take a phone call from it? Right. So aside from being completely ridiculous walking around like this, it's just not possible because there's not a microphone on it. I'm sorry, there's not a speaker on it, and the mic is only used for taking small bits of input, which is one of the things that we'll see when we go over the section on UX and how it's supposed to work and other things like that. And obviously there's also monitors for heart and health and other things like that. And the battery life on these watches, depending on the device itself, usually ranges from somewhere between a day to 2 days, right? So how much battery life do you get from your Sony watch?
A day.
Yeah, a day or so, right? Sometimes I get up to 2 days on this Moto 360. So the device capabilities in terms of, just the format of the watch, it's quite small device. They don't have a lot of horsepower. On the left here is a Moto 360. On the right is a Asus ZenWatch. And there are new ones coming out, like the Moto 362 and other ones, which are pretty decent. But let's get into some smartwatch design. So the main design aspects for building for Android Wear are around what are called notifications and glances. So when we look at simple notification, right, we have something which is a text message or a glance, which is, what's the weather like right now, right? We'll see some of this in the simulator in a minute, but the idea around the glance is that it's small contextual-based information that you can just look at very quickly. It's things like weather, navigation, other things like that. So yesterday, I was trying to find a pub that I was going to meet a friend at, and I started the navigation on the watch itself, and as I was actually walking, it would say, okay, you need to make a right turn here, right? So it's very small little bits of information that you're supposed to use to just let the user know that, okay, you need to do this, or you have a small text message or something like that. It's called glance for a reason. It's something that you just kind of look at very quickly, and then the user can move on. The other thing, aside from glances, is notifications. So we have something called time-sensitive notifications, like a SMS, calendar pop-up, sports scores, other things like that. Right? Very similar to glances, but usually the time-sensitive notifications are something that the user will interact with. Okay, and we'll see an example of that in a few minutes. But what I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about is for when we're actually designing something for the watch, we follow this model, right? So typically when you're using a phone or you're building something for Android Wear, what you do is the user will have their phone in their pocket, they'll get the phone, right? It takes a minute to fish the phone out of your pocket, and you turn it on. So it takes a little while to do that, right? Maybe just a few seconds, but it's not obviously on the wrist and available all the time. So when we look at this, right, in real life, it takes a little bit of time to get the phone out, and then the user spends a significant amount of time on the phone itself, and then obviously they'll put it back in their pocket or their purse or whatever it may be, and then again, it takes a little time to get the phone out when it buzzes or it makes noise, and then you spend a little bit of time on the phone, right? So that's typically how you use the phone itself. But when we design for the watch, we take a different motif because it takes no time to get the watch out because it's always on your wrist. So the idea is that we have these really, really small interactions with the watch as opposed to longer interactions that we do with the phone. Okay? So a lot of people, they say, well, I want to build this watch app that does this, that, and whatever. The idea, though, is that you want to build something that's really small, something that the user interacts with very quickly, as opposed to spending a lot of time on the watch itself, right? So building a game for the watch, even though it sounds great, is not really the motif that we want to follow. Again, we want to have these small interactions that the user will do when they're using your smartwatch application. All right, so again, typical watch usage, tactical. You don't need to get the phone out. Most notifications don't require a response. They just require that the person using your application just dismisses the notification or whatever it may be. And the idea, again, is to make things very fluid and very, very quick when folks are using the watch. All right, let's get into some design principles for a few minutes. Now, one thing to note is that when you bundle an Android Wear application with your Android application, your main Android app, it's that it installs onto the watch automatically. If there's a watch tethered to your phone, it will automatically install. The user doesn't actually have to do anything to install something on the phone itself. So, and we'll get into this in a bit where we talk about how you bundle a watch application with a standard Android phone application. And the idea around this is, again, zero-low interaction. We try to suggest something for the user to interact with and then have them give some input or just dismiss whatever it is that they're doing at that time. Right, so if we look for something like this, the idea around how the user interacts with this is something called a context stream. So you can see that we have a Hangout message, booking, airline, and then the user can swipe left or right, as we see here. Right, on the last one, for a airline reservation, they can swipe right, and then they can hit check-in or something like that. Okay? So the idea is very small bits of information. Obviously, the screen is very small, but we want to be careful not to ask the user to do too much when they're interacting with your application, which is on the watch. Okay? So, along with that, we also have this motif of a cue card input. Right? So if we look at how this works, you can see that the user can tap the screen, and they'll get certain small things that they can do. And obviously, you can see that as this scrolls through, right? There's quite a few things here: set alarms, call cab, whatever it may be. It's very small things. User just basically swipes up and down or swipes left and right to actually navigate through the application itself. Right? So what these are called are cue cards. So cue cards are generally used for input on Android Wear. Right? So again, our idea here is that we want to focus on not stopping the user and having them interact with our Android Wear app a lot. Just small little bits of information or small input from the user to do whatever it is that you wish to do for the watch. All right, so one other thing around this is if we watch this demo very quickly, you can see the first part of this here is, right, so this is where the user actually speaks into the watch. You tap the screen, they talk into it, it records what you're saying, and then the way this works is you get very, very quick responses and quick interactions with the user. So let's watch the demo again. Right? So you're speaking into the watch. It goes and sets a note in that case. In the second demo, which should start right there, right, navigate to work. Right, you can see that we get the little response saying that, okay, I'm going to start navigating. Okay, you can read emails, archive them. If we look at the weather, right, little small cards that allow the user to focus on one thing at a time, and as you swipe through, on the device itself. It gives you a few different things that you can do depending on how much stuff there's queued up on the Android system for the different types of interactions from different apps. Right. But you can see if we look at the timer on the right, each one of these interactions should take somewhere around 5 seconds or less. Right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or counting down from 5, you can see the motif around this is that most interactions should take 5 seconds or less as you're working with the user's working with your application or with some specific notification or glance or whatever it may be. All right. So obviously the device is very small, so we have to be careful not to have very fine gestures. So typically when we design something for Android Wear, we design for big gestures, big swipes that usually go all the way up and down or all the way left and right across the Android watch. All right. So this obviously makes sense. Sometimes you'll see a sample application or app itself that somebody has very, very small kind of little tables or whatever. Right. Again, what we want to do is design for big gestures, have big things on the phone or on the watch, because as you can see, the watch is actually quite small. There's not a lot of room to put stuff on, so you have to be careful not to put too much into the application. Right? As a developer, we want to cram a lot of things in, and we don't really accommodate for the fact that the device is small. So you have to be careful about this. So you can see that instead of having 7, 8 different things, what we do is we have maximum of 3 things on the screen at once, and if you need more than 3 things, what you do is you basically have the user swipe up and down. So essentially this table view, if you wanted to go to 8 minutes, the user would swipe up or swipe down to navigate through the different options that you want to present. The other thing is, we saw a couple examples of stream cards, but stream cards, oops, let's go back. Stream cards are essentially the little cue cards that we talked about. They allow the user to go and interact with different things that are on the device. So if multiple cards come in at the same time, the user essentially swipes up or swipes down to navigate between them, and then you swipe to the right to dismiss those things. So the idea is that we designed for these cards that essentially pop up. Right? We don't really need to do much to actually send these notifications. But as we'll see in a second, any standard Android notification will also show up on the watch. Right? We'll do a demo in a minute as we're looking at some code. Right? So 3 basic things we can do when we build an Android application is typically we want to build something based on cards, right? The cue cards and other things we've already seen. You can also do full screen apps. So for example, I have the Domino's Pizza app on the watch. So you can actually pull up the Domino's app on the watch and order directly from it, but that is what we call a full screen app as opposed to a cue card. And we'll see an example of that in a minute when we look at the tourist app. But the other thing you can do is you can obviously, as a developer, create different watch faces if you want. Right? So there are tons and tons of those already out there, but if you want to create a watch face, you can do that. But these are the 3 kind of styles of apps that you can create for an Android Wear watch. All right, so we're going to get into some of the live demos and talk about some of the coding around this, but again, the watch app is essentially embedded inside of an Android application, or Android phone application to be specific. So when we build something, you have to have an Android main application running on the phone itself, and your watch app is essentially a part of that Android application. Okay, so even if you have a full screen app for the watch, you still have to have essentially a companion app on the Android phone from where it essentially gets installed and all the stuff happens and whatever. We'll get into that in just a sec. Right? The other thing around this is you have to push stuff to the watch and you have to listen for stuff coming from the watch. So the watch is connected via Bluetooth from the watch to the phone, and typically what happens in interaction is that you listen for events happening on the watch on the main application. Essentially, the way I like to think about it is the Android Wear application is just a second screen for your main Android phone app. Right? So that's kind of how I like to think about it. It's just like having 2 monitors. You have application running here, and you can have Windows or whatever on a second monitor. This is kind of the same way. It's a second screen for your main Android application to allow the user to interact with. Right, so one thing that you'll notice when we do a demo in a minute is when we pop open a notification, it'll pop on the on the phone itself like this, and you'll get a notification on the watch itself. Okay, so anytime you tether an Android Wear watch with an Android phone, and the phone produces any kind of notification, it automatically goes to the watch also. Right? You don't actually even have to do anything to be able to do that in your Android app. Okay, so let's talk about developing for Wear for a bit. So it's relatively straightforward. You just need to add the dependencies for Android Wear, and then you have to add a few actions and other things inside of the Android manifest for building essentially a watch application. Right? So again, remember that a watch app is packaged inside a regular application. Automatically installs on a connected Android Wear device. So you don't actually have to do anything, or the user doesn't have to do anything to do this. And when we want to create a Android Wear app, we basically create a module within the same project that we have our main Android application in. Okay, we'll do that in just a minute. All right? And typically, you can use whatever you want, obviously, but typically, the easiest way to build an Android Wear app or an Android app in general is to use Android Studio. Right, so the demo I'm going to do in just a minute will show everything working in Android Studio. It's a nice integrated environment for doing everything. And actually, we're going to drop out of the slides now, and we'll go directly into how we actually create an Android app. Okay. So we have Android Studio running here, and that's a little small, but that's fine. We'll get into the code in just a minute. Right. So if we were to create in this project, right, say we already have our main Android app. You can see here's our application, our Android manifest, and the code for essentially just a vanilla Android app. What we would do is we could add a new module, pick Android Wear, and if we hit next, it would ask us what we want to do and everything. But one thing that you'll notice here is that it goes and selects a package name, and the package name is essentially the same for the Android Wear as it is for the Android phone application. So they have to share the same package. In this case, it's automatically selected a package name from this application already. So I'm not going to do this because I already have this built. But if we go into this app and have a look around, actually, let's demo the app real quick. And hopefully the demo gods are kind to us and it works. And I'm going to show you the technique that I use specifically to build Android Wear, because this can be a little bit of a nuisance in terms of having a proper environment set up, especially if you don't have a watch. A lot of folks I know build Android Wear apps using real devices. The problem with using an Android phone and Android Wear, the real device, is that it takes a long time to take your APK, push it to the phone, wait for it to install, and then have that push the Android Wear app onto the device. So what I'm using here, and I'll go into this in a few minutes, but what I'm using here is I'm using two simulators or emulators. This is the Genymotion emulator here on the right, and this is just a standard Android emulator running on the left. Right, so I have Genymotion running on the back here. This is running Google's Nexus 5 emulator. And then this is just a standard Android emulator specifically running a Wear device. Right? And the way that we would typically set this up is you can go into Android Studio, and when you go and build a configuration, you can go down here and tell it what kind of specific emulator you want to use. Okay? But the setup that I use when I build stuff is I run a standard Android emulator as the Wear device, and then I run Genymotion on the side so that I don't have to keep installing stuff onto a real device, which takes a long time to kind of write some code, push it onto a real device, test it, and you have to make sure you link up the logging and stuff like that. So we'll get into that in just a second. But if we do a quick look at the Android manifest for the main watch application, let's make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see it. It's too big. Okay. All right. You can see we have a package here. All right. This is just a sample app called XYZ Tourists. And the manifest is pretty straightforward. We have a couple of services and receivers, which I'll talk about in just a second, i.e. how do we receive input from the watch in our main Android application. Okay, we have listeners and receivers, and we'll look at that code in just a second. But the manifest for this is actually very straightforward. If we look at the wearable manifest, so you can see here in this project itself, let's close this down. You can see what we have is we actually have three different things. We have the main application, we have the wearable, and then we also have a separate module that we put kind of our shared code in. So if I were to open the shared module, and obviously this is all just Java, but in this specific app, you can see what we've done is we have some utilities in here in a Java class file. All right, it's just nothing too crazy in here. We have things for storing, get the geofence, et cetera, for this specific app. We have some constants which we share between the main Android app and the Wear app. And then we just have essentially a class that stores our attractions. So if we go pull the app up, hopefully this will make a little bit more sense. All right, so this is our tourist app. Here's our Wear device. And of course it'll be dead now. Okay, there it goes. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to pop a notification. Right, we should see in just a minute. All right, so you can see this notification popped up. If we touch on it, we can swipe left and right to see different parts of this app, and it doesn't look like the let's get the notification back up. Okay, so you can see the notification popped up. Right, we have the little paging elements there at the bottom to let us know which specific page we're on for this app. And we have the ability to go, and if we come in here and touch this, go back to the home screen, we can touch this, and that should open the app on the phone. Right, so a lot of the interactions that we do on the watch, sometimes it ends up that we want to actually open the app on the phone so that the user can have a deeper interaction with it, right? And that's what we did in this case. Right? We specifically opened something from the watch onto the phone. Right? If we open the micro app, right? So this is more of a full screen type application. It allows us to let the user do more things, and you can see we'll get a couple of different things around this, and I don't know why all the images haven't filled in. Some of them have filled in, but not all of them. Okay, so this is just a kind of like a little tourist app. And again, if we swipe this to the left, that essentially dismisses the app or the notification. Okay, so we're doing a few things here. We're round tripping from the phone, popping a notification up here like so. And if we go and look at another quick demo here, oh, not that one. Wrong app. Okay. If we look at a demo for different types of notifications we can do, right? We don't want to block this app yet. Pick one of the presets. You can look at a couple of different. Why did that not do a notification? Okay, so you can see that when I popped the inbox style example notification, it showed up on the phone. And it should also, there it is. It also showed up on the watch itself. So let's dismiss this, and let's run another quick notification. Get rid of all of our notifications, and let's pick a content example action. You can see that that's showed up on the device, on the phone, and it's also shown up on the Android Wear. So we can kind of page through this, and we have our different things. Okay, but the specific app we want to look at right now is not that one. There it is. This app. Let's get rid of this. And let's talk about some of the code that actually allows us to send notifications back and forth and other things that we want to do on the device. Okay, so start with some of the services. So if you remember, we looked at the Android manifest. In the inner manifest, we had a couple of services, a receiver. We have an intent filter here as well. But if we actually look at the listener service, what this does is we have this abstracted into a specific class, but you can see what we do here is we say listener service extends wearable listener service. So this is essentially how we listen on the phone for something happening on the Android Wear device. Okay, and you can see what we've done is we've overridden on message received, and when a message event comes from the watch, we can go and say, okay, what kind of event it was, or what kind of event was it, and we're using the constants that were shared from here, right? So if you remember, these are the constants we used and shared between the watch app and the main application. So if we go back to the listener service, you can see that we override on message received, and depending on what specific notification was sent from the watch, we go and do something. Okay. In this case, we can do navigation, right, or clear notifications, whatever it may be. And so you can see how what we're doing here is we're basically, if the user wants to navigate from the watch, we go and create an Android intent, and then we go and essentially fire that intent off, right? If we look at the utility service, we can have a look to see how a notification gets sent from the phone to the watch. So this is basically this right here. So when we do this, we do test notification, you see it pops up on the watch. The way that we do this is, if we scroll past all this code here, right, this is essentially preparing some stuff, preparing some intents and other things for the notification itself. But here's the notification, right? And this is just a standard Android notification. This is not anything specific for the watch itself, except for a few little things that we're going to add, right? So we have notification compat.builder. We're going to create a new one of those. We're going to set the style here, right? You can see that this, right? Get string, nearby attraction. So when we look at this on the device, you see it says nearby tourist attraction. We add a couple of extra things here. Okay, we add the name. We set a specific icon for it. We have an intent around this when somebody deletes or the user gets rid of that specific notification. Set auto cancel, category, color, et cetera, right? So we're just basically setting the basic stuff for the notification itself. Right? If we pull this down, you'll see that we get the same notification on the phone as we do on the actual Android device. So it's just a standard notification, but it gets pushed onto the Android Wear device, and we set a few little things that kind of help make the notification a little bit customized for the Android Wear device as well as for the phone itself. Right? So basically we build the notification here, and when we're ready, we can essentially fire that notification using from this device .notify. Right? So it's relatively straightforward. It's just like working with standard Android notifications. You don't really have to do anything extra to get to this point. Right? So, and we have this abstracted into utility service. If we go to the main Android app, there's not really anything specific for the Wear device, right? And the way that we triggered that specific notification was we said when the user selected something in the options menu, let's get rid of this, right? So this is the options menu, it's test notification. When they select something from the options menu, specifically we're interested in the notification, we say if it's the test notification, call that utility service, trigger the test, show, in this case we're also showing a dialog, but the utility service is what we were just looking at a second ago, which is what we use to send the notification from the phone to the watch, or just essentially just a notification, right? It shows up on both automatically. All right, so if we look at the wearable application, if we go back to the Android manifest, let's start here. One specific thing that we need to add is we need to add the uses feature Android hardware type watch. Right, so that denotes this module in the Android manifest as being essentially a watch application. And then the rest of this Android manifest isn't very interesting. We basically go and set the activity, or what the main activity should be for this app. We have a couple other things we do. We bind a listener service. We use a utility service, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? And so if we go into actual res, the layout, hopefully this loads. It's having a little trouble loading some of these things, right? So you can see that this is not the right device. Let's pick the proper AVD for this, okay? But you can actually build the user interface using the drag and drop user interface tool inside of Android Studio. Here's all the widgets. And some of these widgets obviously don't make sense for a watch. But in this case, you can see we added this custom view, which is android.support.wearable.watchViewStub. Right. If we look at a couple of different things, you'll see that we also have, in the bottom left here, we have specific things for the different format of the watch face. So this grid pager that we have created here, we have one for a round and a square. So that's one of the kind of nuances around Android Wear development, is you have to accommodate for either a square watch face or a round watch face. You don't have to do this, but if you want to do something specific in terms of the UI for a round versus a square watch face, you can do that by essentially doing underscore round underscore square. And oops. If we zoom out, you can see I'll pick this specific AVD, but we get an idea of what that looks like in a round versus square watch, right? Here's our cards that we were using, and then we have something for the sample text in the AVD. So that's essentially what we're looking at here. You can see there's sample text, and there's an image view here. If we look at the top right, there's overlay and image view. That is this guy right here. Right? So unfortunately, the image hasn't filled in properly here. There should be an image behind it, but that's essentially the card that we were looking at a few minutes ago. Okay? All right, so let's look at a little bit more code. Let's see what code we actually have inside of the watch application. All right, so we have a listener service and a utility service that we also use in the watch application to do specific things, show the notification URLs. We create some intent filters. Okay. All right, so these are essentially notifications that we want to show on the watch itself, along with the notifications that come from the phone. Right, if we look at the activity itself, there's really not much in here. We're essentially listening for different types of events. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so we start from the top. You can see this is how we set the content. We glue some of the things in the layout into some code for when the user interacts with the watch app. Right, we're setting a few things. You can see one way that we can test to see what kind of watch it is we can look at the insets and say, is it round or is it square? Right, that will let us know that. If we want to do customization for those specific types of watch faces. And very quickly, right, so here we're override some of the events. So dispatch a touch event, what happens when a specific event comes in. We can detect what type of event it is, and depending on, if it's a swipe or something else, we can go and actually look at, let's try to zoom into this guy right here, right? And so here's our gesture detector, and this is a standard Android class gesture detector compat. And that allows us to see kind of the different things around the user interacting with the watch application. Okay. This is our grid pager adapter. This is what we essentially used on the watch when we go in, open the micro app. And so we'll open this guy up, and maybe not. Let's try this again. Okay. There we go. Now we're getting the images and everything as we expected. So if we explore, this is the grid pager that we're using to allow us to scroll kind of up and down and left to right to see the different things that we have for this app. And now it'll start navigating, and of course this will crash on the app. But let's get rid of these notifications. Okay. All right, so quick flyby of some of the code that we've done here. We looked at the layouts. Right. The other thing that we have in terms of our application is like a standard Android phone application. In the drawable, we will have different resolutions for different icons and other things that we want to use in the app, because again, just like Android on the phone, the Android Wear devices have different resolutions. So the Moto 360, I don't remember the exact resolution, but the new one has a much higher resolution on the display itself. So we typically have to provide HDPI and XHDPI resolution images and other things that we want to use in the application. But you can see we have standard Android drawable folder, and within that we have a couple of different types of resolutions that we need to provide to show it properly on the different types of watches. Right, so you can see that was our launcher PNG in 2 different resolutions. Right. So let's go back to our slides. Right. So add something to an existing project. Right. Once we have this, we say that we want to use a Wear device. Obviously, Wear only runs on newer devices, so if you're running anything kind of less than 4.4, you can't really do Wear. Right. The hard part is setting all this stuff up so that the development is fluid and not not annoying and doesn't take a lot of time. So the way that we build stuff is we set up 2 different emulators. We need one for the phone. We need one for the Wear device, so we can do everything on our desktop without, again, having to push everything to the phone itself. So I like to use Genymotion as the device for essentially the phone. Right? Genymotion is for personal use. It's available for free, and it has a nice user interface, and the emulator is actually very fast compared to a standard Android emulator. But the important part about Genymotion emulator is that it'll provide you with an emulator that can essentially simulate a real device. One of the problems with the standard Android emulator is that you don't really get all the Google services and other things like that that you really need to be able to do full testing of an application, right? So you may not have the Play Store, for example, inside of a standard Android emulator, but you need to have the Play Store to be able to test Android Wear, because you have to install the Android Wear app on the device itself to be able to test an Android Wear app, right? So what we do is create Genymotion 5.0 virtual device. That's Android 5.0. You can also do 4.4 if you wanted to. Then you have to add Google services into that emulator, and then you have to go to the Play Store and actually install Android Wear app on the device. So typically when you work in an emulator, right, so if we were to look at this Genymotion emulator, you can see Genymotion is running here. You can go in and create a bunch of devices, and of course this probably won't work here because the network connection won't be fast enough. Oh, it did work, okay. So you have a small cache of devices that it provides for you out of the box is typically the Google devices. You go and set that up. I already have one running with the Nexus 5 running Android 5.5. But if we go into here, you'll see that unlike a typical emulator, you can see we have Google Play services here. So I'm actually logged in, and I can actually install an application if I wanted to. So this is our app. Right, hopefully this works. Hopefully our network connection is good. You get the idea. This is actually a complete, fully functioning phone running inside an emulator. This is not something you can typically do with the standard Android emulator. We have all the Google services running that allow us to do full end-to-end testing. Right? And of course, there are a couple of caveats with this. Not everything works as you expect. I think the Maps app crashed earlier. I think that's because I just haven't updated the Android or Google Play services in a while. Okay. Anyways, we have Genymotion running our simulator for the phone. We have a standard AVD that we configured inside of Android Studio. So you can see we have Wearable. We can go and create a specific emulator around this. We have a few created already, but we could go into here and we could create a virtual device. And one of the nice things is that they have some standard devices already configured inside newer versions of the Android SDK. So we could create a square or a round device. We used a round in our case, so I'm not going to go create this right now. But essentially you create the device here, and then when you're ready, you can go in and we could go run the Wearable application just by clicking this button. So that'll start our second emulator, which is running the actual Wearable stuff for us, right? But we have to install the actual application not onto the Wearable emulator, but we install the application onto the phone emulator as opposed to the watch emulator, right? Because again, when you install it onto the phone, pushes the Wear application onto the watch. Okay. So again, create those two emulators. You have to add Google services. This is a little bit of a black art, so you'll need to do an internet search for how to do this. There are a couple of decent blog posts that show you how to go and basically go get the binary, the zip file that you need to push into the emulator, the phone emulator, to install Google services, and then you have to set it up, you have to log in, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. All right. So we already looked at this, so I'm going to skip over that. Right. The additional thing that you have to do is you have to connect the two emulators together, because when you think of the Android Wear device, it's connected via Bluetooth to the Android phone, and you still have to do that because we have two emulators running, and this is pretty straightforward. Right. What we'll do from the command line is we'll run ADB devices, and because we're specifically using the Genymotion emulator, this is the Genymotion emulator running on this specific port, and this is our watch emulator running. So what we'll do is we'll run this command to essentially link the two devices together, so it looks like essentially there's a quote-unquote Bluetooth connection between the Android Wear device and the Android phone. Okay, so you can see what we're doing is we're essentially just linking the two together. If we were to break this link, what would happen is that we would get a little symbol here that says that the Android Wear device is not connected to the Android phone. Okay. Makes development much easier than trying to push everything into, so we've already looked at sample code. Makes development much easier than having to actually deploy everything to a device, right? And a lot of people won't even have a Android Wear device. So we've kind of looked at all this stuff already. We have so we looked at notifications. How do we build them? Notifications are the same. We don't actually do anything different. All right, this is how we can open something on the phone itself. So on the Wear device, we have an intent that we create, and we pass it in a specific flag that says when we pop this notification, allow the user to open the main app on the phone by doing open on phone, in this case, open on phone animation, which essentially lets us know that the user can select something within the Android Wear app to open onto the phone itself. Okay, so we've done the walkthrough of this already. I'm not going to go into that again. And I have some references in the slide deck that show you a couple of different things that we talked about in here. Okay, so I think we have about 5 minutes for questions. So is there any specific or general questions about Android Wear development? Anything? No, too early in the morning? Yes, go ahead.
Do you have problems with API values on the watch and on the phone?
So the question is there a problem with API versions between the watch and the phone? So typically, for Android Wear device, if we go back to here, see when we configured this guy, and if we create an emulator, and we go look at this, right, you can see that, let's create a new virtual device. And if we go onto Wear, you'll see that we have, I don't remember what this uses by default. Let's go look, actually. Right, so you can see that we only have the ability to do essentially API level 20 and 21, which is basically 4.4 and 5.0, right? So the user has to have a phone that is at least 4.4 or 5.0. So in terms of that, there's not a problem with the different API version per se, right? So the watch itself has to run minimally API level 20, which is Android 4.4. But if you're running a newer version on the phone, it doesn't matter, right? Because it's so narrow anyways. It's not like the fragmentation we're used to in Android where, a lot of people have 4.0 or, 4.x or whatever. But the phone itself does have to run 4.4 and above, right? So there's not a problem with API fragmentation for the Wear devices because you have to have one of the newer APIs, either 4.4 or 5.0. Okay. Yes?
Another question. When you're developing, you mentioned that the wearable app is inside the APK,
Mm-hmm.
phone app. I'm doing development I deploy it separately. When I click play, the play button in Android Studio, I either send it the APK to the phone directly or to the watch directly, and only on release it's really packaged together.
Okay.
I was wondering, do you work in the same methodology, or are you every time you're doing some minor fix on the watch, are you creating an APK that includes the both?
Right. So typically we include both when we build something, right? So you can push just onto the watch emulator if you want, but when we typically test something, we want to have both the watch and the phone simulator, because obviously in this specific example that we showed here, in this specific example we showed here, you can see that we had this shared project which had some code that was shared between the wearable and the main watch application, right? So right, the specific style that I've shown here is that we keep both of them up, both the Wear and the Android phone emulators up, so that we can test everything like in full, right, from end to end. Okay, so you can just deploy to the Wear device if you want, but then how do you test the notifications and other things like that? Right? Does that make sense?
Yes. Just a question in Android Studio itself. Like, if you go up a little bit to the screen.
Yeah.
So when you click on this wearable arrow.
Yes.
Right arrow, green right arrow.
Yep.
Yeah. Play. So when you click this button, it's really made an APK for the wearable device.
Yes. Well, it's the same APK, right? Let me find where this project is at. It's Android projects here. All right, so if we go, which app is this? This is the XYZ tourist attractions, right? So if we do, right? So you can see that we have the wearable APK and the application APK, right? So yes, you can build the wearable APK and push that onto the device. You see here at the bottom. Let me clean this up, all right? So you see that we do have the ability to just create the wearable APK. But again, what we prefer to do is just push the main the main app with everything inside of it onto the phone and let it push onto the APK, right? So obviously, if we look at the size of these APKs, it's not going to be huge because we don't really have a lot in them, but let's have a quick look to see how big they are. Right, so this looks, and so this is about, what is that? About 2 megs in size, is that right? So if we look at the size of the application itself, you'll see that's just a little bit bigger. But again, you can do that, but what we prefer to do is test everything together, right? So for initial development, yes, it may be useful to just push onto the wearable and not worry about the application. But typically, we want to test everything in unison. So, right? So it's just different development style. Right. More questions? All right. Yes.
So, in your opinion, does it make any sense to create an application where you have your main app is simply very small client and most of the functionality is on the watch itself?
Yeah. So that's a good question. The question was: does it make sense to have most of the functionality on the watch and just have essentially a small stub for the main application? I think that kind of depends on what you're building, right? But if we go back to how we approach the user experience around building a watch app. Let's go back to this slide real quick, right? And again, a lot of this depends on what you're building, right? But when we're building our app, one thing that we had to do is we had to make sure we had showed some restraint in terms of having too much on the watch, right? Because it's such a small screen, there's not really a lot of stuff, in terms of the features that, there's no speaker and other things like that. We typically like to do more stuff on the phone and less stuff on the watch because we would like to follow this model for just quick interactions that the user has on the device, right? So one of the things we do is translations, for example. So in our application, when you touch the translations button, it will pop open and you just say, where's the bathroom? Or right, where's the closest pub or whatever. Right, and that it just does a quick translation, but all the stuff actually happens on the phone application in terms of the actual translation and things like that. And we just essentially show the user the results of those things. So we try to do just small things. We don't try to make a full-featured application on it. So, okay. More questions? All right, thanks for coming, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.